Welcome to the UC Student and Policy Center. I'm Catherine Baker, Director of the Center, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to a program at a very slow time of year in the Capitol when there's not much to talk about. But this is the second year the UC Student and Policy Center has put together an end-of-session look-ahead. I call it an end-of-session sesh. And there's no one else in the Capitol that's really doing this right now, where we have an opportunity to come together, hear from some terrific and influential and very knowledgeable, and I would say fun, folks who are involved in the Capitol community about what we can expect in the coming weeks, possibly even coming days, as well as maybe some tips or highlights from this last year and what's coming next year. There's a lot to cover. And that's a program and conversation like this, first of all, is in partnership with CalMatters. I really want to thank our CalMatters partners. They do great coverage of what happens in our Capitol community, and we're pleased to partner with them on this, so thank you. They also provided a pretty good moderator, so that's all good. Yes, we should do that. And I'd like to also just say this is what we do here at the UC Student and Policy Center. It's one of the many ways we try to convene together in person for conversation that we find insightful, enlightening, and that includes your questions. So the last 10, 15 minutes or so of today will be questions from the audience, so get ready for that. We'd love to hear from you in our programs. We also have a great program coming up. I want to make sure you know about it. From the California Policy Lab. California Policy Lab is a research institute that is based out of both Berkeley, UC Berkeley and UCLA, and they focus on a few key areas in their research: labor, education, health. They also focus on our social safety net and criminal justice. And what they do is research that is focused on helping inform legislation and regulations and policy. It is very applied research. And the Policy Lab is an amazing resource for the state of California, and they are bringing an office here to the center right across from the Capitol. So if you work in the policy-making community, I want to make sure you connect with the California Policy Lab. And next week's an opportunity to do that. August 26th, from 4 to 6 o'clock, they're doing a program on insights on affordable California. Affordability was top of the list at the beginning of this legislative cycle, and I think it's top of the list on many Californians' minds, and it will be the topic of the discussion next week. Great speakers, as you can see, so please RSVP. There's a QR code there, and you can also go to the California Policy Lab website. Please join us. You'll need a break at the end of the day, regardless. I believe there will be wine and cheese reception at the end of the program, and then go back to work. So thank you. We are delighted to have you here. I'm eager to get this program started, so I'm going to turn it over to our terrific moderator, Alexi Kosef, who will take it from here. Thank you, Alexi.
Thank you so much. Hi. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Hi, I'm Alexi Kosef. I'm the State Capitol reporter for CalMatters. I'm really excited to be with you all today, and I'm really pleased to see this turnout. This is fantastic. So I'm just going to introduce our panel briefly. We've got a great group here to talk about many of the biggest issues that are going to be facing the legislature in this final month of session. Start with Ben Gollenbeck. He's the Executive Vice President and Chief of Staff at the California Chamber of Commerce, and also a longtime staffer in the Capitol, knows the building well. We have Keely Bosler. You may know her from her time at the Department of Finance, but now she is, I want to get this correct, the founder and CEO of Keely MB Strategies. We have Leah Barrows. She is a partner at Barrows, Clay and Associates, and she has experience lobbying on energy and healthcare and many other issues. And then at the end, we have Cesar Diaz. He's a lobbyist with Capital Advocacy, but also has a past in the building, working for Pro Tem Tony Atkins, and before that with the building trades. So a great diverse range of perspectives here. So I do want to start with kind of the thing that's on everybody's mind right now, which is this redistricting fight that's happening. And I'm going to put you on a little bit on the spot to start. Just with a show of hands, if you don't mind, do you think that this will ultimately be successful on the ballot in November? Is California going to do this? Nobody? None of you do? No, I'm just curious. Like, raise your hand if you think voters are going to redistrict.
Context matters. You can't just have us raising our hands.
No? All right.
This is like
All right.
like a presidential debate. Where
Okay. No, it was just a way to warm you up a little bit. But I would love to hear you guys talk about, I mean, this is going to have big political implications for the state next year potentially, but it's also having ramifications in the Capitol right now. So I'd love to hear you guys, to start, talk about what do you think is changing at the Capitol because so much energy has been focused on this redistricting fight. And also, if you want to look forward, if this does happen in November, how is it going to change the political landscape heading into next year for Sacramento? So happy to start with you, Ben.
Yeah. First off, obviously, just want to thank Catherine, the team here at the UC, Donna Lucas, and her team for helping to put this great event together. Really happy to be back here again this year with this great panel and Alexi. I'll say a couple different things. One, I think it's a little too early to look into a crystal ball, sort of per your earlier question, in terms of whether it'll be successful. I know one thing I'm looking at right now, trying to go way back, which is what's the most amount of money ever spent against an initiative that passed? Because we've all seen, in recent years, we had tribal initiatives and the Uber Lyft, where we've had $100, $200 million be spent. But what's the most, because there is going to be a lot of money spent against this. And what's the most ever spent against an initiative that passed? I don't know yet. We're digging back, going back through the years. But that's something that's certainly going to be interesting because, if voters are confused, obviously there's generally more of a tendency to vote no. I think it's also going to be far more than most ballot initiatives. It will be much more partisan. Obviously, this will become sort of California and Newsom and against Trump. At least that's certainly, I think, the framing from the Yes campaign that we're expecting to see. So in terms of the ripple effect, though, I think I've certainly seen, I know we're going to get into all the big issues that are still outstanding here at the end of session. You talked about energy, and energy covers a lot of them, whether it's cap and trade, whether it's the wildfire fund, whether it's regionalization, pathways. There are a lot of big energy-related issues that need to get addressed here at the end of the legislative session. And I will say, at the Cal Chamber, we are obviously involved in a lot of those issues. The conversations on those have basically been put on pause the last 2-3 weeks. Obviously we've been doing internal meetings and stakeholder meetings and talk to people, but the attention certainly from the governor's office, both houses of the legislature, a number of people sort of in the political world has been solely on redistricting. And basically everybody said, let me get through tomorrow, basically, when, it'll get passed and move to the ballot, and then we can get back into this. And totally get it. I understand, why this came up, but I will just say there are a lot of huge issues, and we're going to talk about CEQA. There's a lot of work on cleanup around that as well that's necessary in terms of what happened earlier in the year, and all of those issues got put on hold. And we got 3 weeks left, and I know, obviously there's always a lot of stuff that happens at the end of session, but that's a lot of stuff to get done in a very short amount of time. And, I am concerned some of the stuff we just might run out of time on it. And what that is, I don't know, because all of them seem like tier 1 issues, but that's been certainly from our perspective, something certainly a ripple effect of all of this redistricting conversation and work that sort of put some of this other stuff on the back burner. But we'll get a lot done. So.
Yeah. Is that on? I think I align a lot with what Ben said about just the sucking noise, which is the redistricting issue. And I worked in the legislature when we did before the Independent Redistricting Commission, and I remember it was the same then as well. It's just a big issue. It's a very highly political issue, and also there's just, I have no idea how the voters are going to show up, but I definitely know that the Republican-controlled Congress has passed a bill, H.R. 1, also called the Big Beautiful Bill by the president, that is going to be absolutely devastating for California's Medicaid program. I've been likening it to kind of like a bomb in terms of, this being such a huge pull out of federal money out of the state's program that it will require the state to really completely rethink how they design the program in a really fundamental way. and it's going to be really challenging. So, I mean, obviously, the longer-term view here is about not having a Republican-controlled Congress that can't check the president's policy agenda, which has already had, we obviously haven't even started to really grapple with all of the impacts of that bill, but numbers are starting to come out. I believe there's a hearing happening today in the legislature to really discuss a little bit more and get more grounded in what the impacts are going to be on the state's budget. But there's a lot to come on that, and it's really, really significant.
Thank you. First off, I just want to, as Ben said, give a shout out to everybody for coming and taking your time out here today and for putting this on. Shout out to my business partner, Delilah Clay, for showing support. Just to dovetail off of what Keely said, I think the impacts of H.R. 1 and how redistricting has totally sucked the air out of the room for folks to really talk about what they're going to do to help fix what the federal government has completely blown up is a very real thing. We're talking about health clinics, we're talking about hospitals, we're talking about Planned Parenthood centers, all trying to figure out what they're going to do in this moment to help make sure that folks have access to care. Planned Parenthood alone has been effectively defunded by this H.R. 1 bill passing, and the impact to Californians is great. About 80% of the patients that Planned Parenthood serve are on Medi-Cal. So this is going to disproportionately impact underserved communities. Every legislative district has Planned Parenthood facilities, healthcare centers in their district, so every legislator is going to be impacted by this. And I'm happy that they're having the hearing today, but I really hope that once all of the dust from redistricting settles, that they put some real thought and effort into how this is going to be mitigated against. On top of Planned Parenthood, you have hospitals. Hospitals are the backbone of the healthcare system. Hospitals have been operating in the red. Over half of hospitals have been operating in the red since COVID, and the passing of H.R. 1 has completely, put everything into even more shambles with defunds. We're talking about payment methods being shut down. And so as the legislature really thinks about how they're going to fix this, there was some talk before session, before we went into recess, and they were saying, maybe we'll do something where we tax large employers who have employees who make so little money that they have to be on public benefits. And that's fine. We do need increased revenues, but we also need alternative funding mechanisms. We need to make sure that providers are paid what they're worth. We need to make sure that reimbursements are shored up. And so, in my opinion, redistricting, yes, it's a big thing. I'm actually glad that we're doing this, but we've still got to focus on some of these kitchen table issues that are really affecting affordability and access for Californians.
This thing on? All right. It's kind of really cool to see everyone here, some of my colleagues, and not only for the last 4 weeks of session. It's going to be a very exciting time and very busy time, especially for our staff and us lobbyists. So thank you, Donna and Catherine, for putting this together for us. I agree with everything that my colleagues say. That's no shock. I think all of us have thought about all of these issues, right? And as we're thinking about some of the messaging points that were just stated, we wonder how that campaign is actually going to work itself out and what points are they going to be hitting as it relates to redistricting. Yes, it's a big hurdle for the measure to pass. It's not polling very well. So there's going to be a lot of different messengers that are going to attract different voters and hopefully get the right voters to come out for whatever their position is. You'll see Munger. There's a lot of Munger money now. You see Arnold Schwarzenegger making a comeback into state politics here, right? Some kind of protecting his own legacy. What that looks like, how that's going to shape up, creates different divisions and different opportunities, because in crisis, you do get a lot of that. So I was just thinking about just about 2 months ago, there was a lot of criticism from the governor, from the Labor Federation about how he addressed collective bargaining in the budget. And there was sharp criticism online. And now you see them hand in hand, basically working side by side together. And so you're going to see a lot of other alliances that are not necessarily proven out, but because of this particular situation, they're going to be brought together. So we'll see how that all shapes up for the initiative.
All right, sorry to jump around a little bit here, but one of the biggest stories this year was around a couple of bills that Gavin Newsom helped push through in the budget negotiations related to changing the California Environmental Quality Act and regulations around building housing and other infrastructure in California. This was sort of a big win for the governor, for the abundance movement, which he shouted out. And it's sort of a culmination of almost a decade of increasing focus on housing policy in California. I would love to hear from you all whether you think this is sort of the start of a new era of kind of further major changes to CEQA, or is this kind of, is this the crest of the wave, and this is kind of what they're going to be able to achieve. I'm wondering just sort of where you see things going next in what has been this policy priority for Newsom, especially given that he's sort of phasing out now at the Capitol. So I don't know if Cesar wants to start.
Very interested in what Cesar has.
So I have some history on this, and Ben knows this very well. Having worked at the State Building Trades Council and having shaped CEQA and CEQA exemptions for certain projects sort of on a case-by-case basis, and of course the pressures that was under the act for reforms because of housing. And I so happened to move into the Pro Temp's policy unit at that time, and my colleague Jono here just took over that role there. Has seen different changes in that, right, and how the legislature has looked at CEQA as it relates to housing as a key priority and forced changes. But they did it in a way that worked with labor at the beginning. And so at that instance, they said, hey, what do you need? How can we make this happen? And it wasn't until there was divisions amongst labor that a deal actually transpired. But it's very difficult to actually see the production hit because you saw, even under that agreement, they had to come back and make more changes to that. And so jump forward to where we are now, right? And to your question, will there be more CEQA exemptions and more attempts to reform CEQA? The answer is yes. There's always going to be that tension that exists between building an environment and the effects that it will have on the environment itself or the community that's impacted by that construction. The Chamber of Commerce is working on a reform initiative and talking to a lot of developers and, of course, energy developers as well that are being impacted, of course, by the federal government and some of the pressures that we see there. So I think with the restrictions on where to build renewable energy projects, where the goals are for California to meet its environmental standards that we want to meet in terms of emissions, you're going to see that pressure to get there faster. But how we get there is going to be very interesting to watch. So yes, the conversation will continue. In fact, it's happening now with regards to the tax credits that were being eliminated by H.R. 1, impacting wind and solar projects.
So I agree with Cesar. I do believe that this kind of opens the Pandora's box for change. I have this kind of example that I like to use. I don't know if anybody ever watched the show American Ninja Warrior, where it's an obstacle course. And there's always that one piece of the obstacle course that everybody has trouble getting through. And then once one person gets through, everybody can get through. And this is what I feel like could happen with CEQA, is that you have these changes that are starting to happen, and we're probably going to see little chips here and there. The environmental community is fighting back, and this is one of the things that I always talk to baby staffers and baby lobbyists in the businesses. Just because something may not impact your industry specifically or an issue area that you're working on specifically, there's a domino effect, right? So the CEQA changes that happened in housing this year, I have a lot of clients in energy, and so a lot of legislators were like, oh, the enviros really took a hit on that, so I don't know if I can just get there with you on this because the enviros don't like it. So you always have to take everything kind of into consideration when you're looking at different policies, and CEQA was a big one, so we're all watching very closely.
I'm going to just briefly touch on this issue, but CEQA, is it's almost like it's got this bigger than kind of import. But what I hope that we continue to do, and I think one of the things that's been really great with the lifting up of the abundance movement and Ezra Klein's book and articles before that, is really getting government to be much more focused on outcomes and less on process. And so CEQA is really a process, right? And is it yielding the outcomes that we want? Yes or no? What other things are impacting those outcomes? There's lots of things when it comes to building housing. It's not just the environmental process. So I think we really, here in Sacramento, like I'm just a huge advocate for people really understanding and doing that analysis first about what the issues are. What are the issues that are making it really difficult to build infill housing up and down the state? Let's pare that down and figure out if there are law changes that are needed. But I hope that we do continue to have this conversation.
I'll just quickly, before we move on, I'll certainly agree. I do think that this is sort of the beginning, and I will say if this is the crest of it, we're in for a lot of problems here in the state because, no, I'm just going to be blunt, like there is zero chance we meet our climate goals unless we find a way to build clean energy projects faster. Period. Full stop. And so you look at, obviously we've had cycles with drought. Like we need to be able to build all sorts of water infrastructure projects much faster. Full stop. You even look at the reforms that took place earlier this year, which, I had some friends not in the Capitol asked me, saw some coverage, like, how big a deal is this? And I was like, well, in comparison to everything over the last 50 years, this was monumental. In comparison with what we actually need to do, it was actually just the tip of the iceberg. And I'll say even on that, like what got done this year, which was very difficult, and I give an immense amount of praise to the governor and legislative leaders who helped sort of push this thing through. We were literally dealing with essentially just infill housing. We're not talking about housing in the vast majority of the state. And B, there was actually a problem in what they put in there. There's a provision in there, I won't get into all the technical details of it, but it actually will make building housing more expensive in some ways, and that needs to be fixed going forward. And so it was certainly, while it was, again, an enormous sort of step in the right direction, it was hopefully, again, just a first step, because otherwise we're going to be in for a world of hurt, both on housing costs, energy costs, water, et cetera.
Thanks. And thanks for that great metaphor about American Ninja Warrior. I enjoyed that. On the energy front, another really big thing to be watching out for at the end of session is whether California is going to extend its cap and trade program, which, for those who aren't familiar, is a system where the state has essentially capped greenhouse gas emissions pollution, and many industries have to sort of buy credits or lower their pollution in order to meet these targets. There's a desire by the governor to extend this program through 2045 to create certainty, but there's been a hang-up over how this is going to happen, and obviously time is really running short here. So, anyone who has some insights would love for you to share what you think the biggest sticking points are at this point on getting that across the finish line, and are there any kind of major changes that we might expect to see in the program in order to make that happen, imminently. So I don't know if it looks like you were ready to start, maybe, Keely.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously the cap and invest program or cap and trade program, which is the current law, the rename is cap and invest, has been a huge, important part of the state's ability to address climate change. I actually started my career working in energy and resources a couple decades ago, and there was no money for these kinds of programs. There was a little bit of regulatory fee money, maybe some general fund once in a while. During the Great Recession, zero. So when this came on, I think, I was working for Governor Brown at the time. Like we waited a few years to see if the revenues were real before we started spending them. Then we did start committing them to different projects and programs across the budget. And it has been a very, very important, steady source of money for helping make this climate transition happen for our economy. And so that money, especially in light, again, back to HR 1 of the Big Beautiful Bill, like it is even more important for us to have that money to continue to make progress. There is going to be a lot of conversation about the design of the program. There was in 2017 when we reauthorized it last time. There's going to be as much this time. I think that stability for the market really matters, in terms of making sure that this does get done this year. Because if it doesn't, I really think there's going to be a lot more uncertainty about the state's path forward on climate. Especially because it's not just about the revenues, it's also about the declining cap that's embedded in the program that gives the price signals to the companies that are emitters that they need to plan for these emission reductions over time. So really important thing that's happening this year. I do think there's a lot of sticking points right now about the design of the program, about free allowances, about offsets, about some price collars, if you will, around the actual auction. And the Assembly just released language this week. So I think that's progress, always kind of a forcing function to get people to the table and what are we actually talking about instead of just bullet points.
Yeah, so I would say, I think one of the biggest sticking points from my perspective of cap and trade is that there are so many opinions out there of how it should be done. You have the governor's method where he just basically said, we're going to change the name to Cap and Invest, and we want a clean reauthorization. I personally love this. It's the most successful carbon trading market out there, so if it's not broke, don't fix it. Leave all that to CARB. Just extend it, get it out there. CARB can make whatever changes it needs to. You have another camp, which is the Assembly's camp, where they want to get it as close to a clean reauth as they can, but they will be making some changes per the language that Keely talked about that just got released this week. Then you have the Senate, and they're kind of more, they put out a framework, a very light draft framework before recess, and they're probably going to be doing more, and I think they're the ones who are probably going to do more in line with what the environmental community would want to see. So it's just a matter of landing all of those planes. The funny thing is that we are now in near September, and conversations on this started happening, I think it was late last fall when the Senate started their working group. So I thought to myself at that time, naively, whoa, they're really taking this seriously. We're going to get this done. And then you had Trump, you had wildfires, you had budget, you had policy committee deadlines. And so with every new fire that came up, we had to put cap and trade on the back burner. So I'm happy that things are finally starting to really take form. Whether or not they're able to land the plane or not remains to be seen. I think we're going to have to just recognize within ourselves that this is still fighting against redistricting, all of the other issues in energy that Ben talked about, HR 1 budget, and all of the unknown trailer bills that are out there waiting to be seen.
And the one thing I do flag, so, just from the chamber perspective, obviously we think that our position on this has changed a lot over the last 20 years. We were sort of ardent opponents when it first got introduced. I will say that after, being around now for 12, 13 years, our members really appreciate that the certainty that the program brings, and it has, to Keely's point, generated tens of billions of dollars, sort of for the state to invest to help meet its climate goals. We think, sort of to Leah's point, that the program is working, and the more changes that are made to it, the more problematic it's going to be, the more expensive it's going to get for Californians, and likely the less revenue that you're going to end up seeing for these climate programs. The one thing I do think that will be sort of the force function to get something done, and why I'm still pretty optimistic that we'll do that, is that they're going to announce the results of the most recent auction later on this week. And every indication and expectation we've gotten is that it will be a pretty disastrous auction because there is so much uncertainty right now about the program, and that things have gotten punted out this far. And I do think that is going to, I hope that will sort of serve as the impetus for folks to make sure to get something done before the end of session.
And just really quick, sorry, I want to say the auction, to your point about the auctions, the auction in May decreased by half because of the market uncertainty, because folks were like, what's the legislature doing? It was so unclear. And that's about almost, I think it was like almost $600 million.
I think cumulatively it's been around $3 billion is some estimates since there's been some softness in the market with all the uncertainty. Because this is about buying allowances that you do plan ahead, right? So if you don't know if it's happening anymore.
So first, I agree with all the summaries and sort of the expectations. But one good thing that happened, because it's been so long that they have been having these work group meetings, is that they've heard from all of us, right? They've heard from their own colleagues, to talk about the legislature, and also stakeholders of how important either the GGRF funding or the actual cap and invest framework is. So having that collective inventory of information is going to be helpful for them because they've already had that and it's at their disposal. They don't really need to have more. Now, in the sausage making that this is, right, you're looking at sort of leverage points. Will the governor get what he needs by the extension, a clean extension, without dealing with GGRF funding and what those categories of funding are, right? And the legislature is going to look at it and say, well, we want changes to the framework based on all of these conversations that we had with stakeholders, but we also don't want to lose the leverage on spending by delaying what categories we're going to see and changes we want in future years. So that's also going to be something that's going to be very, very highly politicized, right? Embedded in that is, of course, high-speed rail, right? Huge billion-dollar set aside, right? Will that stay? There's wildfire protection funding in there that governor also wants. Plus, guess what? Going back to CEQA and housing, one of the biggest, largest sources of affordable housing is from the GGRF, right? Now we don't have redevelopment dollars. There's a bond that's out there. It's questionable whether that actually makes it, but there are a lot of folks that want to see a bond happen for housing. That would be a lot of money for the right projects. So in that leverage piece and how they actually figure this out is going to be super important.
Okay, so another hot topic, AI. I have my list here because there's so many bills, and I just want to give you a sense of some of the stuff that the legislature is trying to deal with in this area. Algorithmic discrimination, safety protocols for large developers of AI, regulating chatbots, limiting how the technology is used in hiring, limiting how it's used in workplace surveillance, limiting how it's used in setting prices. That's just a taste. There's many, many more things. So, for those who've been following this, I'm curious, do you think, is the appetite for regulation on AI increasing right now at the state level, or is the tech industry gaining sway and sort of getting more of their way? And is that changing now that the Trump administration is sort of backing off from that at the federal level? How do you see sort of the landscape kind of settling here in Sacramento around that?
Yeah, I'll say, and at the chamber, we sort of helped to lead the business sort of coalition working on this effort, and Ro on our team does an amazing job with that. It's been interesting. Certainly, we knew there were going to be a lot of AI bills last year. There had just been a lot of chatter. I do not think that we were expecting quite the flood. I mean, there ended up being, I think in the end, sort of between AI and privacy, it was about 83 bills last year, and that was more than we expected. I will say that. And so I think at least we were prepared this year that there would be again sort of another flood. So I'm not sure I would say it's necessarily increased. I think what I have seen is that the areas in which some of the proposed bills and regulations are going after have definitely sort of broadened out. So there's a lot more this year. You talked about chatbots. That was not really something we dealt with last year, whereas this year there are multiple bills sort of dealing with chatbots. Obviously some are repeats. There were some bills in the space. Obviously Scott Wiener's got the most attention that got vetoed last year. He's obviously back with a sort of a modified version of his bill. And so we've certainly seen some repeats. But, California the governor signed last year a pretty big, it was almost over 20 bills, many sort of first in the nation in terms of regulation. So, and I will just say from the chamber's perspective, from our members' perspective, we do not, I will be very blunt, we do not say we welcome sort of additional government regulation in many areas, but this is one because it is still so nascent that we actually think there does need to be regulation. And that's why we've sponsored bills particularly in areas around education, making sure, you know, this is an area obviously that's flourishing with a huge startup culture as well. We want people operating off of a level playing field, not sort of, you know, benefiting incumbents in the space. We want these new companies and new ideas to flourish. So we do agree that there does need to be some regulation. Again, we've sponsored bills this year and last year in this space. What we do want to be very careful of is, you know, and I think the governor struck a good balance on that. I think there's a number of legislators who've struck a very good balance on that, is understanding that we also don't know what we don't know. And so let's make sure we're setting up frameworks. Let's make sure, again, everybody's working sort of from a level playing field. As new issues come up, let's make sure we're thinking about not just what's the news story that happened that leads me to introduce a bill, but what's going 3-5 years down the line. And I think very, very mindful and cautious of, I mean, I'm going to be blunt, like the AI industry is essentially propping up the San Francisco real estate market, the commercial real estate market right now. And so, I mean, downtown is starting to sort of come back to life there because of the AI industry, because of startups. And so, you know, we're very clear of like, this is already generating billions of dollars in, you know, sort of economic activity, billions of dollars in tax revenue, hundreds of thousands of jobs, and that's only going to grow. So let's not make sure, while there are other states who are trying to be very active in recruiting a number of these startups, that we don't sort of kill the golden goose. And I think what's going to be one of our largest economic engines for decades to come.
Cesar, I actually want to jump to you on this because a lot of the legislation is coming from labor, of concerns about how it could affect the job market, specific industries. So how do you think that, I mean, is their argument gaining sway or losing sway at the Capitol right now in terms of thinking about this technology with lawmakers?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of agreement because the nature of work has changed and is changing faster because of technology. From policymakers of how to address the AI issue and how workers are being affected by AI and automation. So I think there's that. There's less of a sort of agreement on how to address it and solve the issue. And you see different bills, and I think there is something that's going to work out in AI this year. You have RBK, you have Buffy Wicks, and you have Scott Wiener. You know, they're all very strong supporters of tech themselves, and they also want to regulate tech in this way. And so this is going to be an ongoing issue that's going to be next year and so on. And so labor will be front and center in those conversations. You can see it even with state contracts and some of the bargaining units with the return to work order, how that's going to evolve in the future. You saw the governor wanting to introduce contracts for AI, you know, use and expansion within state agencies. So in that respect, I think it will be how it's used. Does it help workers augment sort of like their quality of work, you know, how they work on the job site, or if it displaces workers. And that's where I think there's going to be a lot of tension in that. Monitoring, there's a lot of issues around that, and you know, sort of looking at what is it, your profile, your gait, different things, and how that data is used that workers are very concerned about. And of course, rightfully so, there's a lot of other overlapping issues like safety at the work site, where there may be conflict between protecting workers' rights, but also protecting the work site for other things that may happen. And so those tensions are unfortunately going to be sort of not worked out in one single year. And as we incorporate more tech into the work site, it's going to be evolving.
Should we move on?
Yeah. I mean, I just want to say, like, artificial intelligence. I mean, it's another of many technological innovations that have happened over time, and this tension between what it will do to jobs and labor, like, has always been there, and it's going to continue to be there, and it's really something that is squarely in the public domain. Like, how do we think about that? I think the governor with the higher ed institutions, you know, just announced some partnerships. I mean, it's here. It's in our classrooms today. My kid uses it on Snapchat. I don't know about any of yours, but there's AI bots everywhere. And so we really need to figure out how in government, I think, to harness it, to deliver services in a better way for people. But we also, so, you know, a lot of these bills may like shut some of those things down or make it much more difficult to do that in the future. So, these are things that we shouldn't be, hiding our head under the table on. We should be actually trying to figure it out and put appropriate guardrails and safety measures, but also not completely stifle it. But we do need to figure out, like we need to figure out in a lot of areas, including in our climate change, how we are going to transition workers out of industries and jobs that are no longer going to exist and into ones that are good paying jobs that can support communities and families. And that's the really hard work that the legislature has in front of it, but it's also really exciting work as well.
One thing I'll add is more from an energy perspective and the impact that AI has on the energy grid. They are, like, the servers take up a lot of energy usage, and I think what will be important for the legislature this year is to really make sure that the bills that they pass in the energy world take into consideration the impact of AI on the grid. So we have a lot of big bills that are still floating around that need to get figured out and get toward the finish line. We have regionalization. We need to make sure that our utilities are financially healthy through the wildfire fund. There's just a bunch of things that are still looming that we need to make sure that, we take into consideration all of the things: electrification, AI, reliability, affordability, all of those things wrapped into one.
I just have one other thing. Back to higher education. I mean, all of us need to learn something about AI because it's impacting us, right? So we need to understand how to impact it. And I think places like Calbright, I see Danny May out here, which is a public community college that's able to design really quickly different courses to help people skill up, are going to be really important to our future. Because we are going to need to learn new skills. We are going to need to learn how to harness these technologies in our current jobs, not even thinking about how we're going to save jobs that are going to be lost, but also just in terms of how we do our own work. And so I think it's just that education piece is really an important piece that government has to tackle. And luckily we have Calbright, and that's going to be really helpful in this transition.
So I think we're going to hand it over to audience questions here in a second, but just to wrap it up quickly, a little bit of a forward-looking question. We know that the Senate leadership is, going to change next year. We're going to have a new pro tem, Monique Limon. Any quick thoughts from any of you about what issues may rise or fall in importance next year as a result of her taking over from Mike McGuire in that House?
Look at the Senate alum down there.
Nice one, Ben. Thank you very much. Yes, of course, every leader has, new priorities, but with the state, as volatile as California, with the surprises that we've seen, the different disasters that could occur at any given time, I think is yet to be determined, right? And of course, if there's a lot of unresolved issues from this year that are still huge magnitude, we're talking about 4 to 5 different issues here, right? And like my colleague mentioned, wildfire fund, so important. And so these things need to get figured out. And so there's like tier 1, and then there's tier 2, tier 3, all of them equally as important, but some that are perhaps more pressing than others. So I think that in terms of that dynamic, how they get along with the Speaker's office and the Governor's office is going to be very meaningful, especially with the Governor being on his last year, right, and being a lame duck, and how that's going to do the Speaker and the new pro tem kind of join forces and become sort of a stronger negotiator, sorry, Keely, in the budget and other priorities, right? That could very well happen as well.
So I would say I love a good shakeup. So anytime we have a leadership change, no matter how much I love prior leadership, I like to, just kind of get into the action and take advantage of the chaos. I typically don't try to make predictions. I love crystals, as you can see, but I don't have a crystal ball. So I'll say I'm just using this as an opportunity to stay nimble and pay attention to what's going on, and just use the relationships to make sure that clients are taken care of, to make sure the state of California is taken care of. I know the new incoming pro tem, Senator Limon, she's really big on environmental issues, so I'll get to work with her in the energy space. She's been a huge champion for healthcare issues and women's rights, reproductive issues. So I'm just looking forward for all that's to come.
Yeah, I was going to say environment and consumer protection broadly has really been a primary focus of her personally in her legislative packages. I do think when you're a leader, you don't get to just work on your priorities. It really depends on what you're served up in terms of issues, and obviously the fiscal situation for the state is going to be in the front burner next year, this year, for the foreseeable future, because we have a real imbalance in our structural deficit, and then we have all that is HR1 and all the impacts that are sizable. HHS agency, California, recently put estimates out that it's $30 billion annually lost federal funds, $30 billion. We talked about a budget deficit last year of like $12 billion, right? And that was hard. And we have multi-year deficits on the official Department of Finance multi-year projection, which is on their website, that are growing to $20 billion, and those are structural deficits. So that means expenditures exceed revenues in any given year. So it's going to be an important topic. She's going to be in a really important role in helping to lead to rational conclusions.
Two just quick things. I think, yeah, again, especially when, she's only going to be pro tem in all likelihood for 2 years, given that she's termed out in 28. So, and given the financial situation the state's going to be facing, I think it's likely that, her priorities, and that's part of the job as leader, your priorities get sort of, subsumed to those of the broader caucus. Though, obviously you're able to have a large impact. I do think, sort of following up on Leah's point, she has been, I will say, a strong champion on sort of equal pay for women, transparency around that. She's done a lot of work, obviously both, sort of through the Women's Caucus, through her legislation. Obviously, I think the legislature is now 59, I think it is, out of 120 are women. So obviously there's almost gender parity there, but I would expect, certainly to look at her both either in her own bill package or through the budget to be continuing to sort of push on, sort of women's rights issues.
All right. Well, due to time, I won't make you predict the next governor, but I think we have questions. Yeah.
All right. Yes, some questions. We're hoping to hear from folks, so raise your hands because this is a great opportunity. You got most of the ones I was thinking of, and see where we are. I do have one in my back pocket, but it's going to be boring to other people. Rose, is there anyone in our overflow rooms? I see a hand, and Christy's going to grab you in the couple in the back, and we'll come back to Jim. Thank you. Actually, Christy, while you're over there, I'm going to go to Jim first. By the way, from our national labs, the innovators in machine learning and also co-managed by the University of California. Just want to point that out.
Thank you for the call out, Catherine. You talked about the cap and trade or cap and invest program. There's some discussion that maybe the money part gets deferred and the structure part gets done this year. What's your handicap on that one?
I think Cesar kind of touched on this. They really have not done any expenditure plan in what we call the 40%, which is the amount that's appropriated every year in the budget. It's not subject to statutory spending, which is continuous. And so it would be a big surprise to me that they wouldn't have some spending plan. They may not do major restructuring to the continuous appropriation, because that may be a much harder and longer conversation. But I imagine that there will be some money allocated before the end of the session. That's my sense, and that's what you said.
I agree with that, right? But there's also that point about the auction and what the auction looks now and what changes you make to the framework and how those changes are going to be received in the market and whether that affects the existing programs or future programs. So if you have too much change, you could have that risk. So I do think that the Senate has a good plan to sort of delay, the changes to the funding as they're looking at changes to the framework as well.
And I'll just point out that one issue was settled in the budget, and that was that they're using $1 billion to support CAL FIRE this year. And so I don't see that changing, and it does actually have a huge impact on what's available with the lower auctions because of the uncertainty, and then that shift, there's less money to allocate that hasn't already been allocated.
Okay, great. And Christy's got a microphone over there.
Yes, you did. You spoke a lot about delays and how they're being caused by some of these bigger issues that are coming on. how do you think it's going, what is happening is going to impact the efforts to lower insurance rates in California and also provide some relief to those who have already been the victims of some of these major disasters?
Well, I would just really quick, I would say I think this is kind of all wrapped into the larger budget discussion that's still taking shape. I mean, I know before we left for recess, summer recess, there were conversations of a special session sometime during interim. I haven't heard much about that now, so I don't know if they're still considering doing that, but I don't know if that has really even been debated budget-wise yet.
I mean, I'll just say, obviously, there's a lot going on in the insurance market. There's a lot going on, both sort of from the regulatory perspective as well as from the legislative perspective. I do think that we're going to be seeing certainly, when you look at we've talked about the wildfire fund here a couple times and sort of stabilizing that fund going forward. Obviously, to address, potentially the Eaton fire down in Southern California, and then, as we know, we sort of live in a year-round fire season now, so who knows what's to come in the future. There's obviously an important insurance component to that, so I do think that some of it will get addressed there. I do think some of it's hopefully sort of getting addressed as part of the regulatory process that Insurance Commissioner Lara has sort of initiated, and I do think has somewhat stabilized the market, at least in the short term. But there is certainly more to come. I think this is going to be sort of one of those issues we're going to be seeing the next 2, 3, 4 years popping up again, at a minimum from a regulatory perspective, if not from a legislative or executive order as well, or ballot measure.
I just wanted to, tag on really briefly about the wildfire fund. And when I was in the executive branch, and this is how I think most executive branches see it, is when the end of session comes, there are some things that you need to do and a lot of things that maybe you hope don't come to your desk. But I would put the wildfire fund in a very high tier of things that need to happen. It is not good for California ratepayers and affordability when our investor-owned utilities are spiraling towards bankruptcy. And we've seen this movie before. I was working for Governor Brown and then Governor Newsom when PG&E went into bankruptcy. And these issues are you have to deal with them when they're on your plate. It may not be your first choice of things you want to work on, but it is what you have to do for the state of California. And obviously the insurance issues and the wildfire issues are so closely interwound. We are now spending a lot of money over in utility rates to do a lot more work, making our lines safer and our communities safer, hopefully. But there's still a lot of risk out there, and numbers that I've seen are in the multi-billion of what's really needed to really improve wildfire mitigation up and down the state.
And just to expand on that point, because I agree with it on 100%, there are 2 bills out there that both chairs of the utilities committees in both houses have introduced. And they're under sort of the whole umbrella of affordability. And of course, you cannot separate them from the wildfire fund. So aspects of those pieces of legislation are very heavily opposed by utilities, right? And so there's this negotiation that's taking place that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks on that.
And the utilities are for the wildfire fund, but then you have large energy users and the ag community that have issues with the wildfire fund. So even though these are all planes that kind of have to land, there's still opposition and a lot of things that need to be worked out.
Okay, Christy, you have another hand back there. While you're going to that one, I'm going to do microphone holder prerogative. 3rd largest employer in the state of California is the University of California. Also in the news in terms of some cuts to the hospitals, medical research, and otherwise. I know that hasn't been mentioned yet, and I'm going to stay in my lane. But how do you see that? I'm looking really at Keeley in terms of the fiscal impact of a major institution. Obviously, full disclosure, I work there, affected by the federal cuts and that ripple effect on the state as well.
Right. Higher education is really getting a double whammy because those cuts that are happening from the federal level are not going to be able, frankly, to be backfilled by the state's general fund in its current state. And UC and CSU especially are some of the more vulnerable general fund expenditures because there's not an entitlement, there is not necessarily a lawsuit, and so those have always been really hard. The Great Recession was devastating on UC and CSU's general fund. There were large student fee hikes that precipitated, that, and then we had some years of stability. But when the general fund is unstable, higher education funding is unstable. They go together.
Thank you. All right. Do we have a hand over here? Finally get the mic.
Thank you. One theme that's run through this is really H.R. 1 and this federal issue. But what I haven't heard is if you guys think or if there are discussions about basically California's version of H.R. 1. And Newsom has really taken on the mantle of being anti-Trump. So do you see discussions about both on the policy level, like California needing to respond, and then on the political level, do you see the politics being advantageous to the governor to be seen as, hey, we're going to do our own one big beautiful bill act here at the end of session to be seen as like the counter to what's going on at the federal level? Is that something that might be in play at the end of session?
I'd say, I'm not quite sure what, given the fiscal situation and all of these big things, I'm not quite sure what a big, beautiful state bill would look like. I guess conceivably, if you actually package up all of the things we're talking about, which is how it obviously often goes at the end of session, you could consider that maybe, I guess, like an energy beautiful bill. I don't know, I'm reaching here a little bit. But yeah, I'm not quite sure what that would look like. I also just think that the immense financial uncertainty that we're heading into, and let's also remember, again, we haven't gotten the LA tax receipts yet because of the fires. We're not getting them for another couple of months. And so, again, I don't think anybody can do I don't know how you would do a beautiful bill without basically knowing how much money you got to beautify with. So, yeah. So I think, I could see some sort of packaging around some of the things that are going to get done at the end of session. I certainly think they will be done and framed as we are pushing back on Trump, and 100% that. But I'm not sure it gets sort of that big, broad packaging, maybe with caps lock tweets and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, no, it's the big difference is that in California we have a constitutional requirement for a balanced budget, and we really have very limited tools in which to deficit finance, which is what the federal government did, right? They passed a bill that was not paid for with today's taxes. It's paid for with borrowing. And so, that's just not possible in California. Yes, there have been bonds that economic recovery bonds that were done. There have been different borrowing type of proposals in the past to try and, but essentially all of those things have to get paid back, and they have impacts because you end up paying more in debt service over time in order to get some one-time bump. And the big issue for California right now is just expenditures growing much faster than revenues are projected, and you just really, at some point something's got to give, and you have to right-size that.
Great. Since you were the first person here today, you get to close us out with a lightning round super fast question.
Well, I'm not sure how fast this is, but building off the fire question earlier, obviously one of the big issues around fire is we have forests with way too much biomass in them. We've got the same problem in agriculture, and now our cities have got to keep green waste out of landfills. The obvious solution to at least many people is California needs a big manufacturing sector on bio-based products. Quit subsidizing like burning it up for electricity or biochar, neither one of which will ever pencil out, but really go after the bioplastics, the cellulosic nanofibers, et cetera. But to get there, we've got to kind of have an industrial policy, which most people don't like. We had a big summit here a week and a half ago where a couple things that came out of it were that bio-based product manufacturing be part of that CEQA exemption for advanced manufacturing. But the bigger issue, the number one thing that came out, was a procurement policy requiring public institutions to purchase bio-based products manufactured in California from California biomass. Now, obviously, there's going to be support and controversy about that. I'd love to hear your take.
There we go, good. Your take.
I defer to the chamber.
Reduce, reuse, recycle. I mean, I love the vision that you have, because I think being a climate leader means exactly that. It means that you are figuring out how to deal with your waste products in a sustainable manner and not putting them on a pallet to China, which is what we did for a lot of years. So, this is really, I think, part of, how can we think about the transition of jobs from one sector to another. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we really need to be. I agree with you. I think an industrial policy would be helpful in this area, because otherwise it's really hard to navigate all of the different factors that we have, and especially around new manufacturing that may have impacts on local communities, and they are uncertain about it. So there's definitely a need for everyone in our California community to understand the impact of how they consume, because if you really are for climate change and for a zero emission future, you have to think about those waste products and think about real practical ways to deal with them.
I just thought of another panel to put Keely on when we have that conversation here at the center. So Cesar, Leah, Keely, Ben, Alexi, thank you. Great job. Fantastic program. Hope to see you next week on the 26th at the California Policy Lab.